So yeah, it's a real pleasure to have Kim Turford Moa from the Dundee Heritage Trust and Felix Pedrotti from the University of Southampton here to discuss this project today. And I'm just going to hand over, and at the end I might come back to ask questions, encourage you to ask questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We are here to talk about the Tales of Discovery project. It's a joint project led by the University of Southampton, where Felix is from, and several polar institutions across the UK, but focusing in around the ship that Dundee Heritage Trust cares for, the Royal Research Ship Discovery. So our talk today is going to cover a few things. So I'm going to start off talking about the ship and its polar voyages so that you have a bit of context to what we're talking about, and also about how and why that polar history has led to the collections becoming dispersed. Felix will then take over and talk a bit about the technology that we used, and then we'll also talk about what we're going to be doing with this technology and how we're going to use it. So, Act 1, a ship, its city, and the polar voyages. So, what is Discovery? Discovery is a very unique vessel in that it is the last of its kind and also at the same time the first of its kind. It was the last three-masted wooden ship to be built in the UK, but it was also the first ship built specifically for scientific research. It was built in 1901 in Dundee in Scotland and was really inspired by the Dundee whaling ships. It took just over a year to build it, and it was designed to withstand the Antarctic ice crush. And we're now a museum in Dundee, which you can come and visit. So why Dundee? It was, interestingly, a curious choice almost. So the expedition itself was very much centred in London. It was funded by the Royal Geographic Society, and they decided that it had to be a British ship. Only two tenders came up, one down in Cornwall and one up in Dundee. And because Dundee had that historic Arctic and even Antarctic whaling heritage at that point, Dundee was chosen as the place to build the ship. It was chosen as well as part of this because it's sort of had this huge heritage and of also building clipper ships which were able to take things speedily across. And because Discovery needed to do multiple things, travel across open seas and also go into the ice, it worked really well to be able to use both of those technologies together. So the Discovery had a long and quite varied history. It has been to Antarctica 3 times, which are mentioned in the blue. So the first and probably the most famous expedition is the British National Antarctic Expedition of 1901 to 1904. That's the one that we'll talk about mostly during this presentation. After that, the Royal Geographic Society really wanted to sell it back to the British government as an Antarctic research ship, but the British government went, no thank you, we don't need it, it's too expensive. So they ended up selling it off to a Canadian company, the Hudson's Bay Shipping Company, and it just became a regular cargo vessel. That meant that a lot of the original interiors from 1901 were taken out and changed. The British government did eventually buy back the ship in 1923, and they sent it in for a refit down in Portsmouth, otherwise known as the Vosper refit, which is the company that did it. And at this point, again, they completely changed the inside. They put in huge modern up-to-date technology. So back in 1901, they didn't even have access to Morse code, for example. So they put in all of this technology to be able to help it. And on the Discovery investigations, they went down and they found out a lot about whaling and whale populations and things like that. Following that, it was then part of the British, Australian and New Zealand Antarctic Research Expedition, which we call BANZAR for short, because otherwise I'd be talking all day. And this was largely a colonial expedition. They did some science whilst there, but it was also about making sure that land was being claimed, if you think about the time period and the heightening tensions that were going on at the time. Following this, though, it truly was a very old-fashioned ship. There wasn't as many sailors trained to be able to sail her properly, so she became a training place for the Boy Scouts and Sea Cadet Corps. And in the 1980s, she came back up to Dundee and was opened as a museum in 1992. So it's a really, really long expedition. And through that, we have collected a whole bunch of different things. So there's scientific samples, there's drawing and artwork, there are letters and personal effects, scientific equipment, clothing, personal objects like medals, expedition material like plates and food and cutlery and all of this stuff. But it has ended up all over the country. So we'll start at the very bottom, down in Southampton. The National Oceanography Centre have samples from the Discovery expeditions. That's the second voyage in the 1920s. In Cheltenham, the Wilson Art Gallery and Museum. The clue's in the name. It was sort of done in honour of Edward Wilson, who was on the first expedition, who tragically died in Antarctica, but a lot of his drawings from the first expedition and his life effects are in that museum. You then have, here in London at the Natural History Museum, a lot of the scientific data from the voyage, specifically from the first and the third. A little bit further north, in Cambridge, you have the Scott Polar Research Institute, which has a lot of personal objects and maps from the crew. And then in Dundee, we have the actual ship, and all of the little bits and bobs that had sort of been kept with the ship, even after it became into the Boy Scouts, when it was starting to be used as a museum. So we have some bits, but not a huge amount, not a complete collection. So as you can see, stuff about the Discovery that you might expect to be with the ship is actually dispersed across the whole of the UK and even further afield. We know, for instance, that there is a plate in a museum in Canterbury in New Zealand. So because it's a global ship with a global history, its collections are similar. And it's really important because it's also an endangered heritage. We have a big wooden ship that was last fully redone up about 100 years ago now, and we're undertaking a huge amount of repairs. The top image there is during the Vosper refit when they were last fitting it out. Because of the ship's unique shape, based on these Dundee whalers, it has sort of a hull that extends out. That's great because it meant that they were able to do all sorts of things like lift the rudder up out of the ice to stop it from being crushed. But it does mean that as it's been dry docked for the last 5 years, that started to sink down a little bit away from the rest of the ship, which you don't want to happen. So we're doing a lot of work to support, to restore, to sort of turn back some of the rushed jobs that were done just to keep it seaworthy in the late 1900s, sort of the 1950s onwards, and sort of restore back and use a lot of those traditional heritage skills that are being lost into returning it not back to 1901 because of the ship's long history, but at least using as many original things and close to original as we can get. And it's at this point that I'm going to hand over to Felix to talk about the Tales of Discovery project.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So I'm going to move this one here. So thank you so much, Kim, for introducing the Tales of Discovery project and the Discovery itself. And kind of from the University of Southampton, once we heard of the story of the Discovery, we thought, okay, this is a pretty cool ship with a really good history that we, as personal maritime archaeologists, I'm quite interested in. So we decided to ask for a little bit of money and kind of bring to life the Tales of Discovery project. The main aim of the project, very simple. We wanted to reunite the ship with some of the objects that were dispersed across the country. In this case, we choose 3 main locations. One is Dundee, the second Scots Polar Research Institute, and the last one was the National Oceanography Centre. The objectives were very clear and straightforward. The first one, create digital assets of all the objects, including the ship. The second object was to create a digital network. But there we used wiki data to bring these objects all together so you can query them, analyze them, but also understand how the ship was related to the various objects, to the people, and to the locations it has visited. And at the end, we also organized a series of knowledge exchange events with our partners. Now, the first stop was the National Oceanography Centre. As we had already a little bit of a sneak peek why the National Oceanography Centre was important, I would just prefer to show you why the National Oceanography Centre is quite important. Because of this, you wouldn't say, yeah, okay, the National Oceanography Centre is not really a museum. No, it is not. However, it is a scientific organization of the UK which looks at everything marine and maritime related. And every time the the discovery we are talking about came back in from an expedition or the new discovery, they bring something back like that, some really interesting fish in glass jars. For marine biologists, of course, a treasure just to study them. Some from really deep, other ones are more shallow fishes. Of course, the discovery brought them back as well, and we decided to record some of these because they were also part of the discovery story. Now, for people who know a little bit about photogrammetry and 3D modeling, they would look at it straight away and say, okay, glass is an absolute nightmare to model. That's why we used a technology where we collected images from these jars from all directions, uploaded to a web-based software called WebAR, which now allows us to look at the fish, at these really cool fish from various perspectives, and kind of give them to the public and see, okay, these are the fish that they brought back. Feel free to have a look and inspect them on your own time within your own home. The second location was the Scots Polar Research Institute. This one was far more easier to kind of collect the data from because we didn't have glass jars with really cool fishes in it. Here, however, we had a lot of personal objects that they had with them on board, such as Scots glasses, as well as plates, and many, many other objects as well. Here, thankfully, we had access to a structured light scanner, which allowed us to collect a really detailed, high-resolution images of some of the objects. A structured light scanner, as you have seen earlier, flashes the light onto an object. The cameras integrated within the system collect the three-dimensional measurements from the object, and it allows you to visualize and create a really nice, accurate 3D model, which then you can slice, analyze, evaluate, preserve, but also kind of give to the public back. The last stop was Dundee itself, and here comes the tricky part. As you have seen earlier, we wanted to record the ship and some of the objects. The objects, even though really cool objects, were fairly simple, okay? Small glasses like Scott's glasses here we have also a pipe from Captain Robert Falcon Sword, but also his cigarette case. These, once again, similar to the Scots Polar Research Institute, we structured light scan them. We also used the methodology photogrammetry, but this one was mostly done with structured light scanning, which allowed us to create some really accurate models themselves. But we didn't stop there. We said we wanted to record every single object. And for this, we also decided the ship in itself is an object that tells a story. But before I get to that, sorry, I forgot about that side. So what it allowed us to do is some amazing 3D models like this sextant, which allowed us really to kind of create these models, and we can measure them, we can analyze them, we can build them apart, but also we can disseminate them to the public so people can have access to these objects. Because many of these objects are behind glass, and it's sometimes really difficult to get a better understanding of an object if you can't touch it. With these models, you can not only touch them digitally, but also, for example, you can 3D print them and use them as your handling collection within a museum to really get a better understanding of what you are holding in your hands. In total, we recorded around 65 objects. Here we have just a couple of selections from knives to plates to cookies, some leftover cookies that somebody brushed under the table, but then we also have tennis rackets and many more objects. Now we can come to the ship itself, and we decided to go for the ship and say, we really want to make a 3D model of this one. It's going to take a while, but we might be able to do it. So the first idea was, okay, how can we record the outside really, really nicely? Thanks to modern technology and through the University of Southampton, we had sort of access to a UAV, to a commercial UAV drone, which allowed us not only to kind of schedule and plan a proper flight across the ship and collect systematic data of the vessel, but it also allowed us to carry various payloads. So as payloads, in this case, we had two different payloads on it. One was a camera, which allowed us to do photogrammetry. This one here to the left, this allowed us to create pictures and collect pictures of the ship from all directions and to run it through a software and create a really accurate 3D model of the ship outside in itself. But we also had a LiDAR payload, which allowed us to create a really detailed record, as you see here to the right, of the rigging itself. While photogrammetry was really good to get the colors, the LiDAR was amazing at really get all the rigging of the ship itself. Now the second issue was, yes, we have the outside looks really good. What do we do with the interior of the vessel? For this, we used the RTC 360 laser scanner, which allowed us to position the laser scanner in every single room and between various areas, which then allowed us to create a really highly detailed 3D model of the ship itself. I was there with a colleague, and of course now, if you think about a 120-year-old ship, what you're going to find? You're going to also find some of the darker corners of the vessel. Thankfully, I was not the one climbing in there. I sent my friend in it and said, yeah, better. Who knows what they kept under the carpet for 120 years? So please feel free to go. And I sent my friend into the more darker areas to laser scan most of the vessel itself. Overall, we laser scanned pretty much the entire vessel. Of course, there were small areas that we weren't really able to access. But in total, I would say 98% of the entire vessel was laser scanned. And I would say, without further ado, I'm going to quickly show you the results over the next 1.5 minutes. And and we will see each other in a minute. Perfect, wonderful. So these were some of the results that we were able to collect of RS Discovery. And as you have already, possibly you can already imagine that this data set is absolutely incredible for many, many reasons. On one side, we have an accurate record of the ship itself, but we can also now start with such a data set, we can start modifying and manipulating the data so that we can get a better understanding on how is the ship designed, but also how it is structured within it. By slicing it in half in various sections, we can really get a better understanding on how are the rooms interconnected, how do people really live on these spaces, and so on. We can also take these data sets and start comparing it with the building plans of 1901. Now, this is the fascinating part because of all the changes that Kim really nicely mentioned earlier, we now can get a better understanding of what exactly has changed over the last 120 years. And this is quite critical for the simple reason that by understanding what has changed and how for example, the timbers have morphed or developed over the time, we might even be able to predict what is going to happen in the future and what do we need to do to protect this amazing heritage. Of course, then you can also slice it in other directions and to kind of create maps for volunteers that really can use these to kind of guide the tourists around that come to visit the museum and so on. Of course, you can also use it for other things, which I let Kim take over again.
Some quite scary photographs. So this is the work that we've been currently doing, our urgent works, which were urgent 5 years ago, but that's heritage for you. So like I mentioned before, the stern is slowly slipping away, and so we figured that what we needed to do was remove some of the weight from the stern of the ship. So we took away the obvious things, like the cuddies, the toilets at the back of the ship. We took away the steering wheel, which is now nicely presented in the entranceway. But we kind of felt we needed to go one further as well. So as you can see here, we lifted up the rudder. Now, this was always designed to happen on the ship. Nevertheless, it was still pretty scary. So as you can see, it was we had to get specialist cranes in and lift it up and pop it back down again. And this work was, we were able to use the scans that we had because after we'd done this, the guys came back and they rescanned the ship, and we were able to track how much the stern of the ship had shifted, and that allowed us to see that what we were doing was working, especially when you're talking about millimeters on quite a large object.
Perfect, thank you so much. And again, after all these events have happened across the Discovery and some parts were removed, what we did is we came back in and laser scanned some of the parts that were mostly affected by this sort of change. We rescanned the hull, we scanned the stern locker and the rudder that was removed. And by having this data set again, we can actually start comparing the data and said, did these interactions that happened on the ship and affected the ship actually had an effect on the vessel itself? And as a preliminary studies, and we are now publishing, we are in the progress of publishing a paper on this one, yes, indeed it has, okay? There are specific areas where you can see that the ship has slightly warped of around 1.5 centimeters in both directions. For the simple reason, with some weight of the vessel, you see that the wood starts to slightly shift across the entire hull in itself. And with that data set now in mind, on one side we were able to compare it, but we also are able to give it sort of back to the public. And every time we created a 3D model of these objects, we also created an entry in a Wikidata storage entry, which then allowed us to create this really big network of different objects, people, and different time periods, which then if people want to analyze, they actually can. Now, imagine we have Scott's glasses, so we really want to connect it within the Wikidata storage to something that already exists, such as Robert Falcon Scott. He already exists as a Wikidata entry. We can then attribute to Scott's snow glasses to the room in itself. We can then start attributing those two to a period, to an expedition, in this case the Discovery expedition from 1901 to 1903-04. We can also then start interconnecting some of the wet specimen samples as well as other instruments, objects and people that we have collected. If we then bring that further out, what we can create is a massive network of objects, people, rooms, time periods and so on, which then we can now analyze and say, okay, we have this structured data repository, which people are interconnected, which objects are interconnected, how do they fit together? And hopefully this data network will give us a better understanding on what went through the minds of these people, how are they interrelated, but also tells a better story of the ship itself. And now to conclude, I'm just going to quickly show what's going to happen next with this project. So we also asked for a little bit of money to do the Lines of Discovery project. So now we have a 3D model, we have the lines of the ship. What can we do? We created a 2.5 meter small wooden model of the Discovery, which hopefully over the next couple of months will be tested at the Southampton towing tank. And this hopefully gives us enough information how did the ship behave at sea. We have some really interesting comments from Robert Falcon Scott that wasn't really positive about talking how well the ship actually performed within the sea, but thankfully now we have the technology available to test exactly that and to really see, was it as extreme as described by Robert Falcon Scott, and what are some of the extreme limits that the Discovery, this amazing ship, was able to hold. And we're quite looking forward to it, and hopefully we will be able to share more information about this quite soon. And back to Kim.
From our side, we are about to embark on a massive capital project as well, so we're really excited as to how we can integrate these 3D scans into making our site more accessible, if we can use 3D modeling to allow people who can't get on a ship that was not designed, annoyingly, for people with access needs. They just didn't think about it back then. So we're using these things to be able to bring more access to the site as well, including things like 3D printing Scott's goggles so that you can actually physically see what that's like. So the outcomes of the project for us have been both technical in terms of caring for our collection and our ship, but also in terms of access and sort of being able to imagine something that is really quite distant for most people. But yeah, we're more than happy to take any questions that you have. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you very much, Kim and Felix. So, yeah, any questions? Oh, there's lots of questions. Wait for the mic to get to you, please. Thank you.
Hi, hopefully you can hear me. That was amazing. Thank you very much. You probably saw that I was listening very attentively. So I'm from the organisation that looked for endurance, Shackleton's endurance. So this is incredible work. Having seen some of the bathymetry, photogrammetry, LiDAR, sonar and everything that we did with endurance, with the platform, so wiki data, can it display and interpret the images and that type of those data sets which normally need quite advanced software to look at? So how does the user interface of quite technical data, how does that work? Does it support it?
So on that one, unfortunately not. So it doesn't really support a lot of the 3D models that we have collected. But the idea of the wiki data is not only to create a more sort of informative network, but also bridging, for example, the various websites of the partners. So for example, if we have Scott's polar glasses, that this one actually then links to the Dundee Heritage Trust archives, where then they can inspect, see the 3D models and so on. So we use the Wikidata more as a bridge that you can, or as a bridge and network that you can analyze and query from a deep learning perspective and so on, but less from analyzing the 3D models themselves. And to use it as a bridge to connect and reunite the ship with its objects, with its people, through this multi-partneral network that then brings to the various sort of partnerships and so on.
Sorry to hog the mic. So if somebody wanted to download the 3D model to really analyze it, how would they go about doing that?
So that one we are currently working through putting all the 3D models available online, but we are working through that because it's a fairly fresh project, and now we're on the progress to slowly then populate the various partner websites with the 3D models, where then people can access them.
Hello. My name's Christian. I work at Sheffield Manor Lodge. So a bit of a different history, but our history revolves around Mary Queen of Scots. So I was interested in the 3D scanning. I've had a chance to play with it before, and particularly the dispersed history, because she was in Sheffield 14 years, 10 years at our place, but the collections that we have are the buildings. All of their objects are dispersed across the UK. Now, when I've researched the 3D scanning before, in the scheme of things, if you're going to go for it, to hire the scanners for a day isn't too bad. But I guess I was just wondering, for the project, what were the logistics of scanning as many objects as you did, or did you have a hit list? Did you go, those are the ones that we want to prioritise? And
so, yes, we indeed had a hit list. We had 3 days available, and we were for just the objects, not the ship itself. The ship itself, we calculated 10 days, but in total we were able to laser scan the entire ship with 250 scans in around 5 to 6 days. And yes, we had a hit list, but thanks to structured light scanning, the technology that we use, the Artec structured light scanners, we were able to create a model in 10 minutes. So we were able to create quite a big collection in a small window of time. So we had actually we had a high processing laptop with us, we had the structured light scanner with us, we knew exactly what objects we wanted. The only issue was I think it took more time to get the objects out of the glass and the vitrines rather than the scanning. So we were like, every time the curator came back, she was like, oh, I can. And we were already done with the previous object. So while we had a beautiful time sitting there scanning, the pure curator, I think, did possibly 30,000 steps that day.
Yeah. So from our side, it was a lot easier to do stuff that was in our archive. So when it's in the archive, it was easier to just sort of bring it out of the room, whereas when it was stuff that was on display, and the stuff that's on display tends to be the stuff that people want to see the most, it would have maybe been, if we were to do it again, we'd have maybe taken them out and put them, so that's actually our education room that we were doing the scanning in, put them in a lockable room for the day, essentially, and that would quicken that even faster, yeah.
And if we wanted to scan, there we go. Yeah. If we wanted to scan objects, would you recommend if we explored where has a larger collection of Mary's objects, and then we would plan to go there for a day or two and scan there? Because I can imagine the logistics of bringing in objects from several different museums is just, it's not going to work, is it?
Yeah, I mean, it's planning. It's talking with the curators, knowing exactly what they want, what you want, making lists, and then being prepared. And I think the second time you guys came, we were so much more prepared because we had no idea what we were doing the first time either. So the first time's always a bit of a learning, but yeah, you sort of get there.
Great. Any more questions?
Take that out because of my name is Susie. I'm an architect. I work in museum and heritage. This is amazing. I have a bit of experience working with very large digital models of historic buildings, and I know just accessing that information is really difficult. So you mentioned you're embarking on a capital development, and I was just wondering, in terms of the public access and maybe the physical manifestation of accessing this data. You mentioned the 3D printing, but beyond that, what might we see in the museum after your development?
Yeah, so at the moment it's sitting in a lovely big hard drive in a safe in the curator's office. But I think the hope is at the moment we have a beautiful walkaboutable, you can walk about Scott's cabin in Antarctica, for instance, and you can hop aboard an Antarctic research base and go and explore that. So I think something similar where you can really be able to zoom in and stretch, and Felix has done some amazing models that are populated with different objects as well. So to be able to see all of that before you go onto the actual ship, where there will be set dressing, but to be able to do those comparable things. We're quite early stages on. We're about to go and appoint all of our people that are going to help us deliver the project. So I think we're really hopeful and sort of knowing that we have all of this data and information, and that we can sort of lead with it and make it central to whatever we're designing as we go forward. Yeah.
So, just to jump in there as well, another small part of the project was also to create a VR / also cinematographic experience, which we have with us as well. We just didn't have the time to talk about it. But there we reconstructed Scott's cabin and used most of the objects that we had to populate the room, and then we then also used a photogrammetry model to bring it back to the Antarctica. And we have with us today, if somebody's interested to see it, a 5-minute short film on kind of the journey back to Antarctica with the objects, with the ship itself, and how the Antarctica looked during the 2 years that the Discovery actually went to the Antarctica.
I think we just have time for one more question, if anybody has one. Somebody at the back here.
Rupert Shepherd, I apologise. I had a train disaster, so missed most of the talk. So excuse me if you've answered this already. Is there any intended online presence somewhere where we can go and see, even if it's just 2D photos of all the objects associated with the Discovery expedition?
So I think almost all of our collection, apart from the stuff that's sitting to be accessioned, is already 2D photographed. So that already exists, and then so Felix was talking about the Wikidata, which sort of acts as a bridge. So using the Wikidata site, you can look across us, across Cheltenham, across Knock, across Spry. So using that to link up. I think the 3D imagery is something that we're sort of relying on our websites to be able to hold, and talking with our tech teams about that. But it's certainly one of the intended outcomes. Yeah.
Great.
Sorry, when you say Wikidata, I understand how that works as a hinge for linking together multiple things, but is there an interface somewhere where I can go and see across all the collections in one place? Because Wikidata is just it's a database of entities.
Yes, so that database of entities, that is, the link should be on the abstract of this talk as well on it. So you should be able to, it's still under construction, but you can already go on it, and it should bring you to various objects, people that we have scanned. It's not now bringing you to an actual 3D model, but it acts as a bridge to, for example, the amazing archives that the Dundee Heritage Trust have. But in this kind of network, we connected objects from the Scots Polar Research Institute that they, for example, have Scots glasses without his name engraved in it, and the Dundee Heritage Trust has Scots glasses with the name carved in it. And those two are interconnected. So every time you go to Scots glasses, it actually informs you there are other glasses which are at the Scots Polar Research Institute, and so on. And by kind of bringing this network together, it also connects them to, for example, Robert Falcon Scott. So the person connected to these glasses is Robert Falcon Scott. So it acts as a more bridge system rather than, because we didn't want it to duplicate data. We didn't want it to put all the metadata and everything again on a website. We just wanted to build a bridge that connects the amazing archive of the Dundee Heritage Trust to the amazing archive of the Scots Polar Research Institute in a very thin, limited, data light method.
That's great. Thank you, everybody. I got to say that chimes so nicely with all the Towards the National Collection research that went on, didn't it? It's like, but yeah, that's a fantastic project. And yeah, thank you very much, Kim and Felix, for